Steve, there's something called intelligent design, which I see as it is neither intelligent or there is no design.
Right.
So give us a quick 1-2. First off, just what is it? What is intelligence design?
Yeah, so the intelligent design is basically warmed over creationism, right? The term originated in 1988, so it goes far back.
Yep.
And then it was quickly adopted by a subset of creationists.
So what do creationists believe?
Creationists, they basically, I'm using that as a catch-all term for people who deny evolution, who deny the science of biological evolution as an origin of life on Earth, of biological complexity, the origin of the species, right? So if you deny that to some extent, and there's everything from denying it entirely, like life was completely 100% miracled into existence 10,000 years ago, to well, evolution's happening, but it's directed to, well, everything evolved except for people, because we're special somehow. So there's sort of there's gradations all the way, but if you significantly deny evolution, you're basically a creationist.
Okay.
Intelligent design is the notion that it's an attempt to frame creationism as a science. And their stated goal, this is now going back to the early 1990s, their stated goal was within 5 years they wanted to be accepted as a scientific alternative to evolutionary theory. And then within 20 years, they didn't make their goals, to be the dominant science in terms of understanding origins, not even beyond just biological origins. And you basically to permeate science, religion, culture, and thought. Utterly failed, utterly failed for multiple reasons. Now, one of the attempts that they included in again, trying to frame it in a way that sounds more scientific was a concept called irreducible complexity. And the notion there was that some structures in biology are irreducibly complex, meaning that if they were any simpler, they could not function.
Like the eye.
The eye wasn't really given as a classic one, but you might think, some people make that argument for the eye. They got very down into the weeds in terms of molecular, components. So, for example, the flagella, right, was the classic one. The idea being that, like a bacteria, they wanted the simplest thing possible, and say this, you can't get any simpler than this. So they said the bacterial flagella, that's the tail that moves around that helps them swim, right, could not function if you take any piece away. So how did evolution get there? How evolution requires that every step of the way there is a functional, and there's an evolutionary advantage. There's got to be this constant pressure to moving in that direction. And they said, so the flagella is irreducibly complex. That disproves evolution. Therefore, intelligent design, right? That was basically the format. The problem is the flagellum isn't irreducibly complex, right? And so what scientists were able to show is that, first of all, there's a false premise in there. The idea is that the flagella had to evolve as a flagella. But we know from evolutionary science that is often not the case, that structures can be co-opted from one purpose to another purpose. So the flagella might have evolved from a non-flagella that still had some of the basic components in place, right? And in fact, that appears to be what happened. It probably evolved from a non-mobile structure that may have been used, for example, to inject toxins into another cell. And then you add another piece, now it could move and do something else, right? So each piece along the way, there was an evolutionarily plausible pathway to take. It just wasn't always a flagella, right? It's the same thing like with a bird's wing. You can say, well, what good's half a wing, right? That's basically the intelligent design argument.
Half a wing.
Yeah, well, how did you evolve a wing? Because it's not any use to you as a wing until it's fully developed as a wing, right? It's like, yeah, but maybe it didn't function for full powered flight initially, right? So, and we have now plenty of examples of creatures that have half wings, right? Or primitive feathers that are not flight feathers. So we know that feathers can be used for display, right? They can be used for hunting, maybe to trap prey. They can be used to glide, whether you're just increasing the distance of a leap or dropping down from a branch. So there's a lot of intermediary steps where wings can be used for things other than full flapping flight. until they get to a size and anatomy and shape where they can sort of clumsily be used for flight. And then once that happens, now there's evolutionary pressures to perfect them as a wing, perfect them as an instrument of flight. You mentioned the eye. So yeah, the eye is complicated. And you know, I've had this argument thrown at me by creationists my whole life. Well, what good is half an eye? And what did our ancestors have, like half an eye hanging out of their heads? Like, no, they had a simpler eye that still worked, just not as well. And there are evolutionary examples. There are examples in living extant creatures of all different stages of eye anatomy that are progressively more complex. So that's not a literal evolutionary line, because these are different types, different evolutionary clades, you know. So, but it shows you that if you just have a pinhole, it still works. It's not a fully functional modern eye, but it still can detect light, and it could still focus light, and it can still, you know, tell you something about your environment. And then as you add each piece to the puzzle, it gets more sophisticated, but it's functional the entire time.
Yeah, yeah.
So the irreducibly complex argument fails conceptually. It fails in all of the specific alleged examples that intelligent design proponents put forward. And at the end of the day, it's what we call an argument from ignorance, or in the context of evolution, a God of the gaps argument.
Yeah.
The idea is that anything that any step in the, you know, the evolutionary process, the evolution of all life on Earth, right? We're talking about, you know, probably billions of species over, you know, for multicellular life over 500-600 million years, right? If you can't explain every single step of the way of every branch of evolution, wherever there's missing information, that God did that. That's what God did.
Yeah.
Right? So we put God into any gaps in our knowledge, therefore the God of the gaps, right?
Yeah.
And that's what intelligent design is, just in a way attempting to formalize it, you know, to try to make it sound scientific. But it's still like, well, we don't know how A evolved into B, so that's the irreducibly complex. God did it. But it's the ultimate problem of intelligent design is that it's not a science, right? Because it makes no positive predictions. It only makes negative predictions. It says, well, we won't be able to explain everything. It's like, well, but we're explaining more and more and more all the time.
Right.
Every time a new study is published. Like
every time a new fossil is found.
And so they're just retreating in the wake of advancing biological and evolutionary knowledge. But that's not an argument, right? That's the way it would have to be. You know, whenever science is advancing into what we don't know, the fact that we don't know 100% of everything is not an argument for anything. It's not evidence for anything.
Right.
It's not evidence for intelligent design or anything else. But so then you have to ask the question, well, what predictions does intelligent design make about what we should find in nature? Again, not about what we won't find or what we can't explain, but what we should find. The problem is, the answer is none. It doesn't make any predictions because, as proponents will say, you know, we cannot know the mind of the intelligent designer, right? So in order to make a prediction about what the intelligent designer would design, you have to know something about that.
Yeah, it's not like we can talk to God and say,
Right.
what do you got on the draft board, you know?
Or why did you do this?
Yeah.
Or why didn't you do that other thing? Whenever we find, they can say, well, that's the way the intelligent designer designed it. You know, there are no transitional species, but if there are, the designer made them.
Yeah.
You know, and he just decided to make an animal that looks like half a dinosaur and half a bird. You know, you got a problem with that? But as far as evolution makes predictions, not necessarily very specific things, because about what evolved when, but in general terms, like we know, for example, that, well, whales are mammals. So they have to be related to terrestrial mammals, which means evolution requires that we find something that's halfway between modern whales and their terrestrial mammal ancestors. It doesn't tell us exactly what pathway, evolutionary pathway was taken, but it tells you there's got to be something in there. And so that was a prediction that evolution made, and of course, it was found to be true. We've in the last 30 years, we've discovered dozens of, you know, intermediary whale fossils. Now, do those falsify intelligent design? They will say no.
Yeah, they don't accept it
because, well, God made half whales.
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore, it's unfalsifiable. And if you're unfalsifiable, you're not science. Bottom line, that's it. So, despite the grandiose plan of transforming the scientific world with intelligent design theory. It's been a total flop. They haven't met any of their goals. They haven't changed the world of science one iota. They haven't been able to bootstrap an active research program. They tried. They had their research institute. They put out like 2 or 3 papers a year, which is nothing, and they're all crap. You know, they're all nonsense. They had zero impact on the scientific community because they're not doing science.
Yeah.
They're not doing science. They're just promoting a religious worldview. They're trying to dress it up like science, but at its fundamental level, it isn't science, and it's not falsifiable. And the specific arguments that they made were easily refuted and have been refuted, and it's basically a complete dead end. The only purpose it really serves now is a rhetorical one. You know, it's just a look. We have our intelligent design. We're scientific. Just ignore the fact that it isn't science and hasn't convinced anybody. It hasn't had any impact on the scientific community. But that's it. It just serves as a front for a magical belief about the world that is not tied to reality.
Yeah, at its core, it's magic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right, now I get it. Thank you.
Good. All right. Thank you, Jay.